What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sideline Stories Chat. Been a while since I did one. Last month, we had a fantastic topic with my guy, Gerard Hector, where we had a really good discussion about what went down with the Luka Doncic trade, which everybody's still shocked about. Nobody can actually explain at all whatsoever. I wanted to do another one during Black History Month. That was unable to happen, but it was inspired by a pretty good article that I came across from Alanis Thames of the AP, and she wrote about Black athletes using their voice and if that's more necessary now more than ever. So I wanted to have a discussion about it. You know, I like to have some nuanced discussions around sports, and I thought the perfect person to do that with is my guy, Chris Williamson, sportscaster. You see him on CBS Sports HQ. Chris joins me now. Chris, what's going on, brother?
What's up, man? How you doing? It's always a pleasure talking to you. Feels like old times when we used to do this a little bit more. But
Yeah,
yeah, man, I'm happy to dive into all these different things related to Black athlete activism and getting our proper justice. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, and I like to let the people know the reason whenever I think about my guests for this and who I want to talk to is generally people I have these conversations with anyway. So Chris is somebody who we have these conversations, whether it's via text or on the phone or when we see each other and hang out. We have these conversations anyway. So I read, as I was mentioning at the top, Chris, I read this Alanis Thames piece and I thought it was really good. For people to think about and check out. And I thought it was really important because of what's going on right now in this country, right? Like the political climate and talking about that with athlete activism. So when you see policies trying to be taken away, like we're seeing for President Trump around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you look at all that in this time, do you think it's important for athletes to speak out, or do they risk too much engaging in political discussion?
Yeah, I think so. It's very important for them to speak out. Let me be very clear about that. However, I think that in this political climate, and the fact that Donald Trump has now won two presidential elections, there's less energy or urgency, at least from my view, right? I could be missing things
Mm,
from athletes as a whole, and I'm not just talking about professional athletes, but also college athletes, um, because like, oh well, they voted for him again, so I got my bag, right? And I think that's a lot of people's opinions. And the other thing that I want to point out, this is not the responsibility of Black athletes, right? Because the people who are being oppressed, the people who are being discriminated against, they're not the ones who should be making, should be forcing people to make the change. It's the people who created these issues and problems that have to get rooted out or have to get eliminated, right, from the positions, and the people who look like them helping facilitate more change and actual real change, right? So I do think it's very important for them to speak out. We've seen it so many times. Colin Kaepernick, right? You know, the links or not the links, but they did do some stuff with like police brutality. The Atlanta Dream players, right? The whole
hmm
WNBA who forced out Senator Kelly Loeffler, who was at the time one of the owners of the Atlanta Dream, and they all campaigned for Senator Raphael Warnock to get that seat. It's so imperative that these athletes do not lose sight of how important it is to use their privilege and their visibility to aid in lifting up and protecting our community. But some people, they just don't. It's not in their DNA, or it's not in their interest to be like, yeah, I'm gonna stick my neck out and risk losing some endorsements or money to help my people.
Yeah, and look, there's always going to be that, right? Like there's always going to be that, and I think you made a good point there too, right? Like it's not. This isn't. I hate this for some people, not us, and this is not why we're having this discussion. That it's incumbent upon the Black athlete to always speak out. There's tons of people doing a lot on the side of politics and grassroots movements that do fantastic work. And if you, I would say this about any athlete: if you're inclined to speak and that's where your heart is, and you're truly in that space, like we've seen in some of the things you brought up, Chris, we saw some of these WNBA athletes do this. We've seen it time and time again, especially with Black women leading the way there. then go ahead and do that. If you're not, your heart's not in it, that's cool too. That's okay as well too. Um, Part of this piece that we saw focused on Natasha Cloud. Natasha Cloud, speaking of WNBA athletes, she has been extremely vocal, and I've been appreciative of her voice and her actions as well too. In regard to racial inequality, LGBTQ plus issues as well too. Um, how important do you think it is for not just Black athletes, but particularly women? Because you and I do a lot in terms of covering the WNBA, and we see this, to advocate for these issues. And do you think that their activism receives the same support as their male counterparts do?
Yeah, so obviously, with the Kelly Loeffler situation, they received a lot of support in being able to get her out, not only from the WNBA, but also from Congress. Um, but by and large, I do think that it's not received in the same way because of, the rampant misogyny and sexism. However, women have always, specifically Black women, have always been at the forefront of these issues and addressing the systemic issues in our country when it comes to racism, bigotry, um, all these isms, right, that feel like they're at an all-time high. And I think it's just more so visibility. So I feel when we get to this WNBA season, because not just Natasha Cloud, speaks out about a variety of issues, but also, DJ Carrington talking about, she's wearing a F Donald Trump hoodie before an unrivaled game. And, she wants the WNBA, to take action against these policies that Donald Trump and his administration are setting out to undergo. You got to band together. This is when you realize your true power and how you outnumber, right? People like Trump and others. You have the ability to affect change in ways that you don't even realize now. And yeah, you may sacrifice some things, but at the end of the day, it's for the greater good. And when people talk about, well, you mentioned how, yeah, some people, it's not in their heart to speak out
Yeah.
and, put their livelihood on the line, right? And I get that. So, however, we would not be here if it weren't for the collective efforts of our ancestors, right? Of our parents, our grandparents, coming together and working to stop hate and stop all these racist things and sexist things that go on in our community. So that's something that stays in the front of my mind when people decide, yeah, I'm just gonna stick with mine. I'm gonna
Mm.
protect my family, make sure my bread is good, and okay, just know that could come at a cost, right? Because nothing has happened in this country, Dexter, as you know, without the marginalized communities pushing back and saying we're not going to tolerate this type of behavior. We're not going to tolerate this type of hate and racism.
I wonder, Chris, with you saying that, because that's a really good point. And just to be clear, when I say that, I understand that some people's heart is not in it,
Right.
but I think that everybody's heart should care, right? Like you
Yes.
should.
Yes.
It's inexcusable to not care, and I think where we've gotten, what we've seen with some stuff with this administration, with people who voted for this administration, is a lot of people who just didn't care, and it was like, oh, this doesn't affect me. And I wonder for a certain segment of people, and we're talking about Black people here, Black athletes here, who have quote unquote made it. They've gotten to a point where they don't care because they feel they're so insulated from other things that might affect people that just look like all of us, me and you in our community. Um, I don't know how you reach those people, is what I'll say. I'm not sure how you reach those people, because I do think what you're saying, coming together as a collective, is the most important thing. And it makes me wonder, another part of what you said, are those people even aware of your history? Because as you so astutely pointed out, nobody is here, if you're Black in this country, without the work of people before you, right? Like nobody's here without that. And I wonder, and I'm wondering out loud, we can tell you can respond to this if you want to. I'm just wondering if that is lost on some of these athletes that might choose to, I don't want to say speak out, because there's many different ways to help and use platforms. Some could be financially, different ways, but choose to get involved. That's what I'll say. Choose to get involved.
Yeah,
I wonder if that's lost on them. Yeah.
I do think because athletes are making more money than ever, specifically on the men's side, because the women's side, specifically basketball, they're still catching up because of all the ways to suppress their value as a league and as just incredible women. But I do think because of how much money these athletes are making, they they don't see themselves in the same way as a black plumber or a black electrician,
Mm.
right? Or a black trans woman, right, who is fighting every day to put food on the table, and they don't have the luxury of having private jets and a chef coming in cooking for them, and they can travel wherever they want at the drop of the hat. I think there was something that Sauce Gardner tweeted about Donald Trump after the potential the assassination attempt, right, before the election, and it just spoke to the ignorance, right, and the lack of hunger to learn and be aware of how politics are going to affect you whether you like it or not. And yes, you may operate in a certain tax bracket, and that means you're not going to be subjected to certain things. At the end of the day, you're still a black man, right, in this case, and you're
Mm-hmm.
still going to be looked at as less than and inferior. The only reason that you are seen in a different light at this current point in time is because you are a professional athlete who lots of people love to see succeed for their team. But if you weren't, best believe they'll be calling you all types of things. And if you get out of line, they'll do the same thing. So I do think, the amount of wealth that these athletes have acquired in part has helped to just being more passive in
Mm.
how they address, societal issues. And that's really disturbing. But I like the point that you made about it doesn't always have to be speaking out. You can affect change with your money, right? You can never say a thing, and you could still be impactful in leading different movements that help bring more equality, but more importantly, more equity to marginalized communities. Because as you know, athletes are not the ones at the forefront of these movements. They may be most visible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But their job should be aiding the grassroots activists who have been on the ground from day one and amplifying their message with it, whether it's, a rally where they come and speak or just donating to an organization that is rooted in bringing better treatment to people, specifically people of color and black people. So yeah, I do think it's been lost. And some people are like, yeah, I don't do politics. Okay, politics going to do you. And at some
Word.
point, one day, the ball's going to stop bouncing. One day, you're
Mm.
not going to be able to play football or soccer, whatever the sport is, and then you're going to be seen maybe in a different light. And then you'll realize, oh, I should have maybe been doing more, when I had the privilege and the platform, but instead I was just too worried, about myself and my family. And again, in a vacuum, by itself, yeah, I totally understand that point, making sure you're good and your family's good, but you have so much more in terms of financial capital that you can risk. I feel like a lot more than the common man or common woman in America.
I think, yeah, that last point right there, right? Like, I think that's what's kind of disappointing, or sometimes a disconnect for me, Chris, is that whether it's, and I just want to be very clear, I'm not somebody that looks to athletes or entertainers to have to speak out on these issues, right? I do think it's important if it's in their heart, as I said before, and they have the platform and different ways to help the cause. I think that's really important. Where I get bothered sometimes is that last part you mentioned, where it's like, okay, you have the means to help, but I'm seeing that sort of disconnect. We even saw this recently, to take it outside of sports, at the inauguration. We saw certain entertainers in the world of hip hop and R&B, perform, where it's like, yo, what are you doing aligning yourself with clearly the administration does not give a damn about you, right? Like that doesn't make sense. So when people make the point like I don't do politics, as you said, Chris, what is that? Like you hit the nail on the head. Politics will do you. Everything is political. Everything impacts everyone in every way. But that kind of brings me to the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is kind of what we're talking about here too, right? Which is the weight of social justice on Black athletes. Because historically, as you mentioned, and I think this was a lot in the past, you saw Black athletes, whether it was, you know, Muhammad Ali, to Colin Kaepernick, as much as recently, use their voice and their platform to be part of the movement, right? Not necessarily, hey, I'm going to be the face of this, but to support the people who are doing this at the grassroots level. And I think that there is that weight out there that because there are some people in our community that look to athletes and entertainers to be at the forefront of this. Do you think that today's Black athletes still feel the weight of, you know, social justice reform like falls disproportionately on their shoulders? And is that fair for them to feel that weight that, hey, you guys got to speak up? Is that fair for them to feel that?
No, it's not fair because they're not the ones who are responsible for the conditions that we live in America as it pertains to, you know, our race relations, right? Or, you know, our gender relations for that matter, and so on and so forth. However, you know, I do feel like today's athlete is a little bit less removed from reality and
Mm-hmm.
understanding, yo, um, these decisions, these policies are impacting my brothers and sisters, right? All across the world. Like when we talk about all these schools, whether it's Texas, Florida, I think I saw Texas A&M as well, you know, remove all these DEI programs and terms on their websites. Um, and then, you know, school matters and admissions. The athletes, the black athletes, the black and brown athletes who are there at those institutions, you could really stand up to those organizations or those institutions by using your platform and showing some sort of, I don't know, whether it's a boycott or a strike, but showing your displeasure to what they're doing to ensure that, hey, I'm gonna make sure my brothers and sisters who don't have the NIL that I have, who are not, you know, making millions of dollars now with NIL, that they're gonna be okay. Because I can be shielded from a little bit, right? But my other people, right, who are not in the same financial state, don't have the same prominence, I gotta look out for them. So yeah, I don't know, man. I'm as I think about it, I feel as if these athletes today are just worried about getting their own, and again, it's not everybody. But I just don't see the same fervor and energy that we
Mm-hmm.
had, you know, during 2020 when George Floyd was murdered, you know, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so on and so forth. It's hey, you know, it is, yeah, it is what it is. You know, we just gonna continue moving on. Like even, uh, I think Steve Kerr, you know, obviously a white coach. He even had a different response than the first time, you know, Donald Trump got elected. It was more like, well, this is who, you know, America voted for because in this election, um, Donald Trump won the popular vote. In the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. Of course, she didn't win the Electoral College, but that's a conversation for another day. So, yeah, I just think people are. The other thing, oh, you know what? The other thing that I think is going on, Dexter, a lot of black people, and maybe black athletes are tired of being, you know, the backbone of the Democratic Party and telling people what's on the line and what we cannot tolerate and what we cannot afford to do, and then seeing people that you thought were going to be on the right side of history choosing the same person that they voted
Mm-hmm.
for in 2016, right? Or even, you know, 2020, even though you know, Donald Trump didn't win that. So I think that's also a factor where black people as a whole, I know I experience it. just very fatigued and
Oh yeah.
exhausted of leading the charge, being on the front lines, getting brutalized, getting killed, murdered, all these things, and our allies, supposed allies, right, going into the voting booths and choosing to enact more harm against us. Um, Even though publicly they said, "Oh no, we're for you. We love black rights. We want you guys to be equal and all these things." It's outrageous what's happening. And then when push comes to shove, you're voting for somebody who is doing his best to eradicate a lot of great things in our country as it pertains to Black people, brown people, LGBTQ plus people, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's disappointing. I love that you touched on the difference that we've seen from, because I worked on a piece on this back in 2020, a good piece, Sideline Stories piece that I won a Telly Award for, about athletes using their voice during that time. And it makes you wonder a little bit about, and we'll get to this a little later, but like, what's the difference, right? I've been thinking about this lately, and so much of it, and I'll talk about this in terms of back then you saw a lot of white allyship, or perceived white allyship, I would say. And you're like, well, what's the difference now and then? There was so much outrage, and some of it I think is people were sitting at home. They had to see a lot of these images. We're on the news every day during COVID. You saw these images, and there was this outrage, and maybe some of it was fake. And we can say that now, right? Some of it was fake. We'll get into some other things a little bit later about what was performative that I think is as well too. But I think there's an argument. I'm intrigued as what you think about this, Chris. I think there's an argument to be made that the stakes are higher now than it was actually then, with the way this administration has been moving, with the way things have affected Black, brown people, LGBTQ brothers and sisters. We've seen this, the stakes are higher. The other side has been more aggressive in a lot of their talk and what they want to do, what they want to eradicate. So you would think there would be more of a response or a pushback on this. We haven't seen that yet, but I do think another point you bring up that's really good. There is fatigue. I'll say I can speak personally on this. There's fatigue, I think, among Black people with this. It's like, look, we've been telling y'all this, right?
Yeah,
Like, we've told you this for quite some time about things that are going on. And obviously there are Black athletes who this affects as well too. We've
yeah.
been telling you this. You haven't listened. I wonder if that's at play as well here too. The fatigue and but I don't know if you think the same. I do think the stakes are actually a little bit higher right now.
Here's what's going on. So 2016, that was Donald Trump's test run for what he could do um, in office, right? I believe he didn't. Yeah, he didn't have control. Republicans did not have control of the
They
Senate,
did
right?
not.
Um, they have control of Congress as a whole. So that was like, I'll compare it to, okay, your college years, 4 years, you're figuring out things, you're testing the waters. Again, this man has never been qualified to run for office. And it just shows, the peak white privilege that he has. And then now, 2025, he's got the Project 2025 that former Vice President Kamala Harris was talking about during the campaign trail. And he has all these other soldiers, if you will, operating in his interests that are legitimately going to tear this country apart. And what he did in 2016, that was child's play to what he's doing now.
I agree.
It is much more aggressive and in your face, and it's not a surprise, but it's so much more damaging because of the power. Republicans control Congress right now. Okay, Donald Trump is acting like a dictator. We are living in an authoritarian regime, and so to your point, yes, it is. The stakes are much higher, and that's why I feel like there should be more outrage and anger and action, from people in our community. But maybe, just something that will happen, slowly but surely. because of the fatigue, as we mentioned. However, we always have to find ways to fight back and respond to bigotry and racism, sexism, homophobia, all those things, transphobia, because otherwise you're gonna be looking real SOL at the end of the day.
Yeah.
There has to be a time when you say, okay, I've had the ability to decompress and rest because I'm so sick and tired of telling people what you need to do and them not following through on it. And then all of us are impacted by it. But at a certain time, say enough is enough. We're striking back and we're not looking back because we know our ancestors went through so much worse. That's the thing that I go back to a lot. Like, bro, you know what our ancestors went through? Being locked
Hmm.
up in chains, all the beatings that they took, all the trauma that they have, and then passed down on the future generations. We we have a quote unquote good compared to them, right? It's not as severe. It's still awful, but it's not as severe.
Right. Which you think would make all of us, I'm not putting athletes in this, more inclined to act and do something in whatever ways you can. Again, it's not always just speaking out. And that goes on us, even me and Chris, who are sports journalists and sportscasters, right? There are ways for us to speak out and help and do things. And I know we do. And some things people don't even see
Right.
in that. So there are many ways that you can do that. I want to talk to you about the perception of black athlete activism versus white athlete activism. Because you know this, when black athletes speak up on social issues, they're often told you got to stick to sports, right? But when white athletes voice their opinions or display things, we've seen this with Harrison Butker with the Kansas City Chiefs. We saw this with Nick Bosa wearing the MAGA hat on the field, and it kind of was, everybody was like, oh, whatever, right? Nobody, I don't recall anybody telling that man to stick to sports. I didn't see that at all. Um, I think this is also a pretty easy question to answer when you're black, but why do you think that double standard still exists in 2025? And how can we challenge that more? Is it us, especially even us in the media, is it us speaking up more when we see that double standard? I know you and I have. we have been very quick to point that out. And we've seen how uncomfortable people get with that, particularly on social media. But how do we further challenge it? Because these are just recent examples I'm talking about, where you'll hear the context of it, Chris, where these guys are just speaking their mind, right? Or they have a right to their freedom of speech. But when it's the black athlete, it seemed like they're trying to be silenced and told to stick to sports. So how do we further challenge this?
So two things. First, the double standard exists because racism is an integral um,
Yeah.
fabric of our society, of our country, and it's never been more apparent in 2025. So that clears up, or that answers the first part. Now, your second part, how do we challenge it? Well, I would say one is people in the media holding these athletes to the fire when they make these points. Really challenge them on why they feel so comfortable speaking out about this and telling their followers or whoever's watching why they have these beliefs. Because I don't see, I didn't see any journalists asking Nick Bosa, why he supported. They didn't do an in-depth interrogation like they did with Colin Kaepernick about why he wore that MAGA hat um, during the post-game interview on NBC. There was none of that. So that's one way, right? Is the people in the media, specifically the white media members, doing the same thing that they did to Colin Kaepernick and others who speak out by going in depth about how you arrive to this point, you know? And that is something, that's one way, we can challenge, these double standards. You can continue to call them out and apply pressure on your white counterparts. Also, asking white players um, more questions about activism and how things are being how things are going on in our country, um, because they're the ones who have more power than marginalized communities, right? They have so much privilege just for being white. And then you think about all the money that they're making. How about we ask them all these questions instead of asking the black athlete, who is so often seen as the the black athlete will speak out. We have to talk about, we have to talk to them. We got to get their perspective because they're doing, because they're black and it's affecting them. It's like, well, yes, I get it. It's affecting them. However, you know who's responsible for this? White people, right? And individuals who think that they are exempt from being seen as inferior to their white counterparts. And I'm talking about black faces, brown faces in higher
Mm-hmm.
institutions, in different government positions, who do not think the same laws or the same rules apply to them because they're at a certain place, you know. So I think those are ways that we can challenge it. But it's a hard situation because there's just so much wrong with our media ecosystem and just how we handle sports media ecosystem, that is, and how we handle um, activism and who we ask certain questions to. So I just hate where it's just we always ask the black athlete so many times what's going on, but not enough do we ask, the white player, the white coaches, and there are of course exceptions, but it's very disproportionate to peppering black athletes with questions. Well, what do we need to do? How do you fix this? Well, I didn't create this. I didn't start this. Okay, it
Yeah,
wasn't me. It
yeah.
wasn't my people.
You can't. I don't in anything in life, right? You can't go to the victim and be like, "Yo, so why did this
Exactly.
happen to you?" Right? Like that just fundamentally is crazy to go to somebody who's a victim of something and then say, "Yo, so why did this happen to you?" That's think about it. In any crime, any atrocity that's gone down, if you did that, we would say that's crazy. But somehow, when it's race, this always seems to be the comfortable thing to do, right? Because it makes people uncomfortable, because you have to go back historically, because, like you said, you have to look at the fact that racism is in the fabric of America. It is in the DNA of this country. It has never been properly addressed. It has been swept under the rug. In fact, even this conversation is being had by two black sports journalists, right? Not saying, and I've had race conversations on this platform with white journalists and
Yeah.
white people who study race and diversity. I've had fantastic, but even they have told me that there's not enough being done by white people. I've heard this from, they are the ones that have said that, like it is not a point. So there are white people I've spoken to in
Yeah.
this field that have had the same messages that we had and are actually doing really good work to try to combat and educate people. I think the sad thing is today, what we're talking about in this racial climate, Chris, is that you have people pushing back and not wanting to educate, but it is not incumbent upon the black folks, athlete or not, to have all the answers, right? Like that's just not possible. And it goes back to something else we said. It's exhausting. It's it's really, really exhausting. Um, I want to go back to something that we talked about, right? Because we talked about some athletes maybe not wanting to speak up because they feel like they have too much to lose, right? So there's this sort of business versus social responsibility debate that's always going on, right? And yes, some athletes may not want to speak up because they might think that they're going to face potential financial or endorsement repercussions. How do you view the balance between somebody protecting their career and using their platform for change? You kind of got your thoughts on that, but I also will ask, should corporations be doing more? Because we saw a lot of this in 2020, and we're going to get into this a little bit more, where corporations like, yeah, we're going to put our money where our mouth is. We're going to back these athletes and back all these people. And now, this is particularly why I wanted to have this conversation with the current administration trying to take away DEI initiatives and things of that nature. Now, where those corporations at? A lot of them are pulling back their money. A lot of them are pulling back their programs, and a lot of them, even on the sports side, aren't necessarily supporting these athletes. So, should corporations be doing more to make athletes feel like, okay, this is maybe not as risky for me to speak up on or do what's right?
They would have to not care about the profit and the stakeholders who they want to keep happy. Because at the end of
Mm-hmm.
the day, we live in a capitalistic country. And so long as that exists, um, it's going to be a very hotly contested conversation about whether corporations, should care more about, um, the athletes that they sponsor, who are part of their brand, a really important part of their brand, um, but also, making their stakeholders, shareholders happy, and getting a lot of profit. I mean, it's possible, right? I think now I know there's some issues with Costco, but on far as a worker standpoint, but I do believe that the CEO pays them very good wages, and they're not worried about profit as much as these other corporations, where you see Target, Walmart, Amazon, so on and so forth. Where, oh, I thought y'all was about DEI, and then Trump gets elected again, and now it's, oh, we're removing DEI. You did, mind you, you don't have to do that at all. You didn't have to do that. So it makes you think you were never really for it. You were just hopping on the trend. You just didn't want to be, ostracized. You didn't want to be, called out. So you did it for a certain period, even though your heart really wasn't in it. Because if your heart was
Mm-hmm.
in it, you'd still be employing these DEI practices and DEI, officers and so on and so forth. So that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, corporations should do more to support the athletes that they have under their brand. Um, I, I don't think I just don't understand um, how you can be so comfortable just pushing aside a certain sector of your consumer base that has been so integral and so vital to your success. And um, yeah, and then to answer your other question about the business side with athletes,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's a fine line, right? Um, because you don't want to lose your livelihood. You want to make sure your family is good. Uh, but listen, if you don't stand for anything, I think the line was, you fall for, yeah, if you don't stand for anything, you fall for anything. Um, because you've made it clear that it's really not that important for you to take a stand. You cannot be neutral, right? And that doesn't mean you have to speak out and be radical. There's so many different ways to get involved and affect change
Mm-hmm.
without uttering a single word. Um, so I think, yes, you care about your family, protecting them. But if you look at your portfolio, financial portfolio, what you have, um, there's a lot less for you to lose than somebody, who's struggling to make ends meet, working at, Burger King or Shake Shack, and just scraping their way by. Um, so that's how I feel. I don't know about you with corporations, but
Nah,
yeah,
I
that's
feel
how.
I feel the same. I think it in an ideal world, right? It'd be lovely if corporations did this. I also understand where we live, and like you said, capitalism, and I think that's the point of all this. And this will get into the next thing we talk about with social justice messaging in professional sports. In a capitalist society, and this is kind of being proven right now, Chris, as you just brought up, the companies are going to choose generally are going to choose profit. And if there's any fear of profit being impacted due to regulation from the government, because you're right about this, some of these companies could stand up to the administration and say, nope, this is affecting educational institutions, where they're threatening to, if they don't get rid of DEI programs, they're threatening to take away, funding. And people like, yeah, okay, we need the money. And when money trumps all, no pun intended, as it has in this country, like this is not to even get too deep. This is all tied into, right? Even if you go back to slavery, right? it was all for economic profit. This country is founded on economic profit and racism, right? That is literally the seeds and birth of this country. And also just taking people's shit, right? Like taking the land. Like this is in it too, by force. And so when you see that today, I think you see certain people in corporations being like, "Oh, nobody wants to lose anything." But I agree with the point you made. Now I agree with that. If you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything.
Right? Yeah, stand for something. Right? Yeah,
you will fall for anything, right? And so, at some point, and this is for all of us, it's not just athletes, it's consumers, fans, journalists, whomever it may be. Where are you drawing this line? Where were you drawing this line? And so, from what it showed me, and this will kind of tie into where we're going next, companies, teams have shown me y'all don't really care. This was all performative, and you need no look further than the social justice messaging that we saw, right? We saw plenty of leagues. We saw the NBA, we saw the NFL embrace social justice messaging back in 2020, although I do find it interesting. The NFL decided to take end racism out the end zone for the Super Bowl. They got rid of that as soon as a couple of weeks after this new administration just came into office. They got that up out of there, right? Everything, as I said, back in 2020 when we all were sitting at home and trying to stay healthy from COVID, and George Floyd got murdered, and countless other black people got murdered, including countless black people who got murdered where it wasn't on camera. Now, where are these efforts? It doesn't look like it's been sustained, Chris, right? So when I look at all that and everything I even reported on back in 2020, do you think the push for social justice in sports, when you just look back at it, till now has been pretty much performative? Because I feel like it has. Like, it's hard to argue that. Let me take that back. Outside of where we saw actual players organized, like they did in the WNBA, because I do not think there was anything performative about that, right?
No, absolutely not.
I also would like to know, when I say this, I'm not talking about things that were player-led. I'm talking about things from leagues, corporations, not the things that are led by the players. I just want to make sure we make that distinction here. When you look at what these corporations, these leagues did, do you look back at it and say, yo, that was all real performative? I'm not sure you guys are really about it.
Yeah, I think it was performative from the jump. I mean, some of them may have been, may have had good intentions, but at the end of the day, it was not something that anybody saw interest in having a sustained effort in affecting and changing the way we do things when it comes to how Black people are treated, and how Black people are so often, overqualified for these positions and looked over, right? Or Black people are not given the same opportunity as their white counterparts when it comes to positions that involve, high intellect and decision making. So we, like the NFL, they say they're not going to change DEI efforts and all that, which is cool. In light of Donald Trump becoming president and trying to remove all DEI legislation, but you still look at the the coaching situation, ownership, right? It's very disproportionate to white people, and I never thought, them putting in racism on the end zone, that always was laughable. Okay. And I never saw, it just felt very performative in the moment. Like, oh yeah, in racism. Yeah, it's over. You put it in the end zone. And again, I get, tension behind it, but nah, the way you end racism is by legislating against it, because you can't, you can try. I think it was Dr. Martin Luther King who said something about, if somebody, what was it? If somebody a white man wants to hang me, that's his problem or something. Hold on, let me see if I can find it.
You get the right. I know the quote. I know the quote you're talking about.
Yeah, but it was like, if it's a crime, for him to lynch me, then that's his problem. So it's one of those things where, yeah, you can have all these symbolic gestures and employ these practices. But if they're not going to be actually sustained and run by people who give a damn about improving our country and improving, the workplace aspect, then leave it at home because it's not doing anybody any favors by just propping it up for a hot second. And then once that movement, that trend passed, it's like, oh no, back to business, back to usual. We're out of that. Okay. Uh, so yeah, I do think it's been, for the most part, largely performed. I mean, even the WNBA with all the things that went on this past season, they were late as hell to the
Mm-hmm.
situation. When it came, the rampant racism and homophobia, all those things. Um, they were sitting on their feet, right? They were sitting back, not doing anything. And yeah, you can't change or you can't control, social media. But there are different measures that you can do, like when it comes to how things are policed in the arena, to make sure that doesn't happen and those fans are not tolerated if they're, uttering insults that, are racial slurs, homophobic slurs, all those things. Um, so yeah, I do think it was largely performative.
Yeah, it has been. I was glad you brought up the WNBA there because I feel like we saw a lot around the league this year where you're right. So much of a better job could have been done, Chris. Not just in the arenas, and I get you can't police everything on social media. You and I spoke about things on social media, and then we got people in the comments, people sending us nasty. You and I have shared
Right.
exchanges, people sending us emails to our websites about things that is just like it's crazy. And then you even saw uh, Commissioner Engelbert, not necessarily have the best moment when talking about the league and the rivalry between, or perceived rivalry between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, right? And trying to compare it to a Magic Bird thing and how that's good for the league. And people just kept feeding into that stuff more and more. And don't even get me started on the Christine Brennan stuff.
Oh man.
Right. So there was so much around this, right, where I felt there were people like us speaking up, and I know plenty of other journalists who were doing it too. But this stuff was allowed to go on, and you felt like there were moments for the league to step in, particularly white people in positions of power in the league. And there was none of that there, and it was disappointing. And
Very
I think when you see that, bro, it only makes you think about how this stuff really was performative. I'm gonna sidestep on a topic real quick.
Wait, hold up.
Yes, you
Wait,
go.
hold up
Go.
real quick.
Yeah.
So it wasn't Martin Luther King. I just want to make this clear to our viewers. It was Stokely
Stokely
Carmichael who
Carmichael.
said that, right? He was saying, yeah, if he's got the power, if a white man wants to lynch me, that's his problem. If he's got the power to lynch me, that's my problem. You know what I'm saying? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where we are, right? Where Donald Trump is trying to bring us back to that point where it becomes a norm for us to be treated like subhumans, even worse than we are right now.
Yeah, they're trying to take things back, and if you're not willing to fight against that, I don't. I really don't know what to say. I really
Yeah.
don't know what to say on that point. This is kind of connected, but I'm gonna just sidestep real quick to something that I saw this week. I think you had sent me this tweet, and we had talked a little bit about it. But NFL reporter Josina Anderson, who I know a little bit, she recently shared some reports from the NFL Combine, which she was at in Indianapolis, that a NFL quarterback coach of a team drafting in the top 7 this year had some comments about Shedeur Sanders, the son of Deion Sanders, played at Colorado, one of the top quarterback prospects in the country. A lot of people feel different ways about him. This quarterback coach said that he came off as brash and arrogant in his team interviews at this year's NFL Combine. Now, Josina and I would encourage anybody, if you follow Josina, please check out her tweet on this. She had a really long post about it, which she was really detailed, and I felt fairly nuanced on this and balanced. She did everything but pretty much say this was a racist trope, and I understand why she had to play it the way she played it, and I respected it. She talked about the need for judging NFL prospects needs to evolve, right? People want Shedeur Sanders to evolve, but she politely said the NFL needs to evolve in this and the way we talk about this. When when I read that from her, and I saw those two words, and I thought about some conversations where I've been at certain places I work, where I've heard people talk about Shedeur Sanders. There are these, oh, he's too cocky, he's too arrogant, he's too flashy. And I'm like, these are the same tropes we hear all the time about black quarterbacks, right? It's tired. Like, we're still doing this in 2025. And I find it interesting, Chris, that at a time where almost half the starting quarterbacks in the league are now black, which is probably even crazy to think of seeing happening 10 years ago, right? We just had another black quarterback win the Super Bowl. You're still having this today in the way black quarterbacks are talked about. So when I see a league like the NFL get rid of end racism, and then maybe they think they ended racism because they removed it out the end zone, and you're still seeing the way you have these racial stereotypes among players in the league, for me, it's not surprising, but it's wildly disappointing. What's your takes on this and the conversation around Shedeur and the conversation the way black quarterbacks particularly are talked about still today at the NFL Combine?
There are a lot of people in society, particularly in the NFL, who are quarterbacks coaches or offensive coordinators, owners, all that, who have a real issue with black athletes who do not come from poverty, right? But not the rags to riches story, that are super assertive in the way they go about their business, and individuals who are very confident in how they go about life or their craft. I think Richard Sherman said it best, like, if you're gonna say something like that, put your name on it, because coaches be saying a whole lot of crazy stuff in press conferences, right, about different players, whether it's like real hate or just trying to start something, and even ownership, for that matter. Put your name on it. If you're gonna throw out that racial trope, right, that racist trope, just put your name on it. Stand on it. That way we know you for who you are, and you're not hiding behind a report, because you're protected, from the rules of journalism, and the individual who gave Josina that information wouldn't release your name, right, and that allows you to just hide behind everything and, well, hey man, I just put it out there. Nobody knows me though, so it's not surprising. I think there are a lot of white people in America who are threatened by a confident and very secure individual, as far as it pertains to black men, black women, probably black women even worse, right? But black men, since we're talking about Shedeur Sanders, they hate to see that, because, like, why are you so confident? Why are you so assured of yourself? Why do you have this insane belief in your ability, to lead a franchise, XYZ?
But Chris, I don't mean to cut you off. Those are all the characteristics that people would say they would want for somebody to play the most important position in the NFL. Those are the characteristics you want in a quarterback, right? Insane belief in himself, confidence to lead the franchise. He's also the son of Deion Sanders. Why would he not be confident? Why would he not be confident? You know what I mean?
Yes, I love that you said that. And I think that rubs him the wrong way, because he's been afforded a much different lifestyle and upbringing than a lot of QBs that we've seen. Deion Sanders is one of the greatest athletes, to ever do it. Forget just football, but he talked the talk, right? He was flashy, he was in your face, and you knew that he was going to bring it. It wasn't just, for shits and giggles. It was like, yeah, I'm going to be all out there, and what's going to make you matter is that I'm going to deliver on the field as well, while I showboat. Um, so yeah, it's just they did not respond well to a confident black man speaking their mind and showing that they have what it takes. Um, and I think part of it also has to do with some of the hate that people have for Deion Sanders. And again, Deion not perfect, and I have my issues with how he does things, but I'll never strike him down or never criticize him for the way he's um, raised his children, right? And the belief that he's instilled in them. That belief definitely comes from Dion, and of course, the mother. But you know Dion's fingerprints all over that because of how they carry themselves. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, it may not be everybody's cup of tea, but don't go there saying arrogant and then you're not even putting your name on it. It's just so dumb because Tom Brady cocky, right? Arrogant,
Mhm.
you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
You're bad at motherfucker. But listen, people love that. They're like, oh, I need that. And guess who's Shador Sanders, one of his mentors? Tom Brady.
Yeah,
Oh, come on, Tom
yeah,
Brady.
yeah.
So
This is how
it,
you know. This is how you know these folks are telling on themselves. And one of the other things that you just brought up there about, who is obviously whose father is in Deion Sanders and having been brought up, and Shador obviously his father's been rich and very successful in terms of that. But this was something that Josina wrote that I just want to read. She said, according to league sources, the said QB coach seems to have issue with, quote, the culture of athletes who have broad fame and financial success before entering the NFL, and their opinions appears to then have a problem with certain athletes. I'll leave it at that. What I find interesting about that quote and that statement, what I'd like to see, we won't see this for another year or so. Are people going to have that same energy for Arch Manning? Are you going to have that same energy? Because he's grown up very privileged and wealthy and comes from a lineage of, uncles and grandfather played and all this stuff. He comes from a quarterback football family and he's now playing at Texas, right? Are we going to say that about him? I guarantee you will not hear a peep about his arrogance. And listen, I don't care what you do if you want to be great. You have to have an unshakable belief in yourself. You
right.
and I would not be in the jobs we had if we didn't have an unshakable belief in ourselves and what we can do as sportscasters. And so to use that as a knock at somebody in what people will always say is the most important position in football, to me, it's absolutely ridiculous. And I do agree with your point, brother. It's wildly lame to not put your name on this, right? It's if you're gonna say this, come out and say it. Because see, the problem is the person that said this, they know, they know deep down that they will get blowback on this for a variety of
Yeah.
reasons. And if they put their name on this, we come to question. I'd love to talk to that person, but they're never gonna do it because, like we see with a lot of stuff like this with racist tropes, there's gonna be cowards. And this person's a coward. I don't really,
Oh,
I don't really got much more to say with that. He's a coward.
yeah. A bona fide coward. A bona fide coward. It's 2025. Donald Trump is the president of the United States for the second time, despite all the things that he's done to hurt people, the convictions that he's had, right? And you scared because I feel like Nick Bosa, he feel a little more
Mm-hmm.
confident to bring out that "Make America Great Again" hat, um, even though he wouldn't stand on it, post game. But still, some of these athletes feeling, even Kyle Kuzma, things that he said, Elon Musk and all that. Um, it's weird. So why not feel compelled to put your name behind it and actually explain why you have this ridiculous take? I'd have more respect for you. I still wouldn't like you, right? But I'd have more respect for you. Like, yeah, I said it, and here's why. I'm like, okay, well, that shows who you are, and leave it at that.
Yeah, but not gonna happen. All right, last thing before we get out of here, brother. Where do you think this goes? Because I think we can agree America's more politically divided than ever at this point, which is very sad. Um, but do you think black athlete activism is going to grow stronger in the coming years? Or do you see a shift where maybe more athletes are going to say, I got to protect that money. I'm going to try to avoid the controversy here. Like, what do you think the future of black athlete activism is here in a polarized America?
I love that question, Dexter. And if I'm being honest, I hate to say this, I'm really unsure because I don't know if there's going to be a legitimate collaborative effort amongst black athletes, in their respective leagues to come together and amplify different grassroots movements and challenge the status quo and challenge all these hateful things that are going on in our administration. I do think that the women will definitely be on the right side of history and uh, making their voices heard loud and clear. And then also, with their money, the men, I'm not as sure. Um, I'm really not because we talked about it. Athletes are tired. Everyday people are tired, exhausted. Um, but I hope that we will see a renewed energy, a renewed fight from Black athletes, but also athletes in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about white athletes. I'm talking about heterosexual athletes um, to use their privilege in whatever way possible to fight back against this racist regime um, and xenophobic regime, the whole lot, um, because it is much scarier than in 2016. Like I said, 2016, that was child's play. That was 4 years of college, figuring out who you are, all that. Now it's, oh, I'm about to really unload on America and take us back to a terrible time for minorities and marginalized people. White men, oh yeah, we're gonna be great. The elite, the rich, 1% living well. Everybody else, yeah, I'm dead serious about bringing us back to that point. So I don't know, man. I really don't know because I thought I would see more, and maybe that was just me being naive to the mental exhaustion, mental fatigue of so many black athletes and so many black people in general. Um, but for the white athletes, you ain't got no excuse. You ain't got no excuse. We
Yeah.
we told
Yeah.
people so many times this is what's gonna happen. This is what's at stake here for our election. And then what do we see? White women, white men voting for Donald Trump. At a higher level, or
It
more than who voted for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
it really feels, and maybe you're seeing this with, I hope more athletes, period, will speak up or use their platforms in the way they think there is. But I think, as you mentioned just now, with the what you've seen in this election, and you've seen white people choose whiteness time and time again,
Right,
right? And over the progress of the country, people vote for self-interest, but then not realizing they're voting against their own self-interest, which has been very interesting to watch as well too. So I don't know. Listen, what I'll say to close is none of this stuff is going away around sports. The people who want to have to stick to sports stuff and act like sports is not intertwined with culture, society, politics, that stuff is ridiculous. And you see how it is even with comments about Shador Sanders, and that's kind of why I included that in this conversation. You're not getting away from this stuff. And look, I think we're going to see more stuff around this in sports, and I just don't know, especially with the fatigue we're talking about that exists among Black people, which is very real, and we're just trying to survive and get through these
right.
next 4 years. I don't know what the next tipping point is, though, but it feels like one is coming. It feels
Yeah,
like one is coming. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that looks like, but the way things are trending and the way you talked about how this administration is rolling, it feels like one might be coming. And I think there'll be a lot of people who realize they can't be silent on certain things anymore. And that includes us as journalists. right? That definitely includes us. I'm not about to have this conversation and be like, these people should do this. No,
Right.
it includes us too, using our platforms and having conversations like this, no matter how many people watch or do not watch this. But hopefully, the right people will watch and they enjoy this conversation. Chris, I appreciate you, brother. I'm glad you're able to rock and do this with me live. I think this was a good conversation. We will have many more, and we got to keep up the good fight for better days ahead. We keep the good fight.
Absolutely, man. I really appreciate it. It's always fun chopping it up with you, whether it's on camera or off camera. Really, we deliver some wonderful, or I gain some wonderful perspective, from you and insight. So anytime you give me a ring, I'll be there to chop it up, man.
Appreciate you, my brother. That is Chris Williamson. Check him out on all platforms. Does a great job. Fantastic sportscaster doing stuff for CBS Sports HQ. I'm Dexter Henry. We're signing off for this edition of Sideline Stories Chat. Stay tuned. We'll let you know when the next one is. Peace.